how many of you remember the name Frank Hester? It'll be in your memory somewhere. There it is. Hester is the largest Conservative Party donor, donating millions to the party, which he believes serves his interests. Mr. Hester was the centre of a scandal earlier this year when his misogynoir was put on full display. Speaking of Diane Abbott in 2019, Mr. Hester is alleged to have said that she should be shot and that she made him want to hate all black women. The Conservative Party said that they would not return his donations, but they condemned the remarks. However, this week, the Electoral Commission revealed that as they were condemning him, they were taking £5 million in donations just prior to announcing the general election. According to the BBC, Electoral Commission records published this week show that the party accepted the sum from Mr. Hester's Leeds-based healthcare software company, the Phoenix Partnership, TTP, on 17th of May. There is a 3-month lag before donations are made public by the Commission. Mr. Hester's £5 million donation in May follows £150,000 accepted in March, £5 million in January, and £10 million donated to the party last year, totaling more than £20 million since the start of 2023. According to parliamentary records, he also gifted the Prime Minister the use of a helicopter for a political visit in November last year, valued at £15,900. The BBC went on to highlight the bigger picture with donations and political parties. The total amount of donations accepted by the Conservative Party in the run-up to the election was just over £16 million, with Mr. Hester's donation via his business, the Phoenix Partnership, being the largest. The Labour Party received just over £26 million in donations in that time, and its biggest donation from an individual entity was £4 million from hedge fund Quadrature Capital. The Electoral Commission's Jackie Kylene said that £51.6 million in donations was accepted by all political parties in the same period, between April and June 2024, which was one of the biggest donation amounts on record for a 3-month period. I'm losing my ability to speak. I'm so sorry. Firstly, Ayden, do you want to say anything about Frank Hester and what it potentially says about the Conservative Party that he's such a big donor to them?
I mean, I kind of just want to say, are we surprised? Really? The Tories would take a donation from the Savile Foundation if they could. They are very much like they're comic book villains. So finding out that they were so happily taking money from him isn't surprising to me in the slightest. It is telling, though, that that party is so intrinsically linked to that behavior, and it makes me think about what's going to happen in the future with them. Just thinking, like, if there's still news stories like this coming out about them, what is going to happen as they reform and try to come back again for the next election?
Funny you should use the word reform there. I don't know whether that was a that could happen. Of course, I am concerned, as I'm sure you are, about like the orientation. I shouldn't say reorientation. The orientation of our politics around profit, and the damage that can do in terms of like our ability to democratically tackle things like the climate crisis and all that stuff, our ability to live in a fairer society. But also, I should point out, because I feel like we can't go through a show without holding the Labour government to account to some degree. There is also another side to this, and that's that Labour were pretty racist against Diane Abbott when you look at the leaks that came out during the Jeremy Corbyn era, and rather it's Keir Starmer's allies, but at the time of the Jeremy Corbyn era. I want to be very clear about that. It wasn't Jeremy Corbyn specifically. And the Ford report, which finds that there is a hierarchy of racism where racism against Black and Asian people just simply isn't taken as seriously as that which is rightfully condemned, the racism against Jewish people. And having this hierarchy of racism, it's got to be unacceptable. And there's some culpability, I think, in the Labour Party in this, to the degree that a lot of the people at the top of the party right now, and a lot of the people surrounding the party, in my opinion, normalised a culture of hatred against Diane Abbott in particular. I think she was the most abused MP in the 2019 election, if I'm remembering that right. Yeah, what do you sort of make of like the general culture of abuse that surrounded Diane Abbott in particular?
I think she just became a punching bag for anyone that wanted to score political points. So she just any faux pas, any error, any slight misspeaking was just held up as her being this useless, unable to think person that shouldn't be in politics, and that's obviously so related to her race and her gender. I think Labour are well, they'll probably think twice before they come out swinging at the Tory party about this donor because obviously they know their record and it could so easily be held up against them. And I think the culture of this hierarchy of racism within politics is it's rotting. Politics is rotten to the core in this country. We know that already, and this is just a facet of that rot, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does sort of the money side gets to the core
Mm,
of why that rot exists, right? So much more the hate is the point. How there's a sort of like a logic that seems to exist on the conservative and right that what triggers and annoys is true.
mm,
Like whatever annoys our opponents the most. It's like being at a football match. Whatever annoys our
yeah,
opponents the most, that's what's true. Nothing
yeah,
else kind of gets involved. Nothing else matters.
yeah.
And I think there's a danger of like liberals falling into that trap and
Oh
going,
my
well,
god.
whatever annoys the conservatives is yeah.
Wholeheartedly, which I think we've seen already on the early days of the Labour government that we've currently got, with getting rid of the Rwanda scheme, which was obviously the correct thing to do, and it was a win for like anyone with a brain. But it was so quickly used as a tool to mock the Tories and to be like, aha, we're winding you up. Look at what we've done. We've scrapped your idea. We've scrapped your plan. And I think the Liberals do fall into that trap as much as these Conservatives do. But it, it's it's something that I think will only continue with sort of this neoliberal Labour that we've got. It won't be changed, and I think someone like Diane Abbott is a real symbol of the effects of what these liberals do.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely true. I yeah, I'm also I'm worried going forward about where Keir Starmer's going with this
Mm,
because I've seen a lot of Keir Starmer's supporters, regardless of what you think about means testing the winter fuel allowances. I have seen a lot of the argument of not this is the fair thing to do, but how do you guys like it now that the pensioners are not the sort of primary voting demographic in control of
mm,
the situation as they were under the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party pretty much worked at the behest of pensioners who were, I would say, radicalized to a huge degree by the papers that they were reading, by a media monopoly that had them like by the throat and got them to vote for the Conservative Party and radicalized them against immigrants, to some degree against LGBT people. But that powerful voting bloc now, of course, has like less power under Labour. Um, but I think there's a sort of like there's something you've got to be careful of not to turn around and go, well, I want not just the single mums to, if you're worried about single mums who were victimized under the Conservative
mm.
Party, turning around and saying, well, pensioners should live in poverty too is not the answer. The answer is that actually we should get the rich to pay a bit more tax so that we can all live better lives, and we don't have to like victimize pensioners or or disabled
Yes,
people. Maybe
yes.
I'm waffling.
No, no,
I don't know.
you're precisely right because I've seen so many arguments happening from people online who are almost giddy that the Labour government are doing something to damage this idea they've got of the wealthy pensioner. Which, don't get me wrong, they exist, but that's by far and away not the average like pensioner. And the fact that you could have anyone that wants to call themselves, left wing or a lefty, and who celebrates pensioners having funding taken away from them feels so abstract. I feel like that those ideas can't really operate in the same head, and I definitely think that we are seeing that kind of an eye for an eye from a lot of Labour supporters, and it's a very dangerous road to go down because you start celebrating budget cuts and taking money away from people rather than doing the thing we all know we're going to eventually have to do, which is to do windfall taxes on energy companies in order to recoup losses and take their profits away from them. It's like one of the only answers we've got, and eventually they're going to someone is going to have to do it. And the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get, because they're going to cut a lot of things before they get to that stage. And so to see, even liberals celebrating this idea of taking money away from pensioners, it's baffling. It's baffling to me.
Yeah, I think any kind of decent socialism that I'd want to be a part of would be seeking to include the elder generations who've been kind of left out of these patterns of thought of, like, actually we want a more just society. We want a society that isn't oriented around capital and profit, and is actually oriented around people and humanism, decolonialism, and bringing pensioners along with that idea, and making sure that we're representing them as well.
Of course, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think that has to be I feel like people are a little bit deceived by the a quarter of pensioners a millionaire figure. It's a slight misconception. In some cases, there are, as you say, some very rich pensioners. However, it's a slight misconception, because a lot of that quarter of pensioners and millionaires is including the pensioners' assets. And if you're an elderly person who lives in London, you might barely be paying your bills. But at the same time, you own an asset that's worth quite a lot. But if you give up that asset, you're then on the rental market, and the rental market is going to be far worse for you. You're going to have nothing left to leave your grandchildren by the time landlords are done with you. They're asset rich. Our producers just put in the chat, they're asset rich, but they have low liquidity. I think that's a brilliant way of thinking about it. Yes. Do you mind if I add some extra context to this?
Please.
So, according to the European Commission's Transparency International report from 2023, there are many restrictions on political donations in different countries. So, corporate firms and other legal entities, so, for example, in France, corporate firms and other legal entities are prohibited from financing candidates. Anonymous donations exceeding €150 are not allowed. Individuals are permitted to contribute up to €7,500 annually to political parties, and a total of €4,600 to candidates in each election. That's both parliamentary and presidential. And in Portugal, it's different again. Portugal calculates donation limits based on the minimum wage. Donations of pecuniary nature made by identified natural persons are subject to an annual limit of 25 times the value of the minimum wage per donor. And Ireland has an even simpler approach. Ireland imposes an annual limit of €2,500 on campaign donations. Now, in the UK, we cap the amount that political parties can spend on an election at £35 million, moved up in November last year from £19 million. So now there's more money in our politics. We also don't cap the amount that an individual can donate, as long as they declare it over a threshold of £11,180. In other words, if you donate more than £11,180, you must declare it, but you can still make the donation. So my question is, Ayden, what effect do you think that this deregulation of money in politics will have, and can anything be done really to reverse it?
I think we're just watching people being fish hooked into privatization, which is what it is. It's because the only people that have that money are people with a lot of money rolled up in capital. So they've got a lot of capital rolled up in businesses. And so these people will then fish hook the government into pulling them more towards the idea that privatizing things and running things for profit is the ultimate way of running the country. And it doesn't matter how intelligent we think these politicians are, having someone in their ear the entire time, whether they be from a business or a think tank or a donor, all of these people are putting money into politics one way or another. It will shape our policy. And I think we're seeing it more and more with this idea that we don't need to improve anything in the NHS when it comes to funding or organization or where the money goes. We just simply need to try a little bit harder and the NHS will be fixed. It's a prime example of it, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's the idea that the way to solve the crisis that's been created by more private interests in the NHS that stripped funding and then gone, well, you can pay £60 an hour to have a nurse that you would usually be paying, £20 an hour for. the idea that that's more efficient has sort of been like crept in by the back door, when of course it's just obviously not more efficient, and our politicians are like kind of vulnerable to this, right? Starmer has taken more freebies than I think it's Blair, Brown, Miliband, and Corbyn combined, which is insane.
That is a crazy. That's a crazy thing to know. I didn't know that. The
Yes.
fact that he's so open to it as well, and the fact that I think on top of these businesses being in their ear and these gifts that they're called and these donations people get, we also have a media class that now seems to be symbiotic. Same word again, symbiotic with politicians. They're almost two of the same thing, and more and more and more, we're seeing that line blur where people like Lee Anderson are getting paid a crazy amount of money to both be an MP and a recurring figure on multiple right-wing news corporations. I think we're getting into really dangerous territory where like the media class and politicians are becoming the same people, and there's even more money in that now. So that will lead to more and more and more privatization and more money being pushed into politics. And we know that money doesn't necessarily make people bad, but it can easily corrupt you when it comes from the bad places.
Yeah, it's the revolving door, which I think has existed for quite a long time between the media class in this country and the political class.
Yeah.
It's becoming just more blatant. They're just doing more like, oh, I can go on GB News, I can just be a presenter.
It's an automatic door at this point.
Yeah, it's an automatic door at this way, exactly. I'm kind of interested though in as that report said, Portugal have the donations set at 25 times the value of the minimum wage. I think that's actually far too high. I think it probably should be something like 1 or 2 times the minimum wage at most. But would you be like in favor of some sort of system like that? Because I think it's an interesting thing in concept, right?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. I think I would be in favor of an idea like that because there's many ways that countries have sort of dealt with inequalities by tying them to the minimum wage. Sort of, I can't remember what country it is. I think it's a Nordic country that the CEO can only make, I think it's something like 20 times what the lowest minimum wage is, or that's what their bonus could be. There's some kind of tie like that, and it works. It's a system that is, a little bit clunky and a little bit sort of unromantic in its solution, but it does get answers. So I wouldn't be opposed to the idea of tying party donations to the minimum wage, because either then politics would have to get a little bit more lean, which would be good for it because it's just currently a big fat cat that needs to lose weight, or the minimum wage would have to rise. But then if the minimum wage rises to a point just to make them get more donations, then they can politics in such a way in which inflation kind of wipes out any minimum wage rise. So I'm pro it in concept, but there definitely is a lot more work that needs to be done around getting that idea to be solid.
You make a really good point there about inflation and them using inflation, because of course, if they're controlling interest rates as well, they're controlling the rate that they're controlling the mechanism by which we would usually monitor and control inflation.
Precisely.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But I love the idea of tying things to the minimum wage. I love the idea that like climbing the proverbial ladder by capitalists and profit seekers can be made that a little bit harder if you're like handcuffing the person at the bottom of the ladder to them so that they can only climb so high,
Yeah, exactly that. It's that idea. It's a very good visualization for it.
Patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.